Since I started posting Sonic-related essays on my channel just over a year ago now, I've said some divisive things. Divisive enough to the point that by the end of any given topic, I've probably alienated huge swaths of the Sonic fanbase. I've been called a classic fanboy despite thinking that Sonic 1 and CD by today's standard just barely squeak by as passable as far as level design goes. And at the same time, I've been considered an adventure hater despite Sonic Adventure 2 Battle being one of my top 3 Sonic games of all time. Additionally, I've been called a modern hater for thinking that Sonic shouldn't talk as much and for hating Forces, despite professing my love for Generations and Unleashed, and probably being more lenient towards their shortcomings than I probably should just based on personal bias. I've been called a Sonic Team hater for claiming that devs that came from the fanbase could do it better, and simultaneously an elitist for bashing portions of the fanbase as well. I'm pretty sure at this point I've been labeled at every point on the Sonic fan Venn diagram. And while that feeling can suck from time to time, it at the very least means I'll be right on brand with being hated by everyone when discussing the subject I'll be covering today. So get ready, peeps, cause I don't think anyone's gonna like this one. The reason that I brought up these divisions to start out this video is to illustrate a point that's probably pretty old hat to anyone far enough down the Sonic fanbase rabbit hole to even be watching this essay. That point, of course, is that the Sonic fanbase is, in the nicest possible way I can put it, splintered. Not splintered as in split down the middle, but splintered in the truest sense of the word. Small but sharply opinionated factions with strongly held beliefs on the series in a seemingly constant state of infighting about everything from the most primary of elements to the most supplemental of details, and just about everything in between. While this does exist in pretty much every fanbase to varying degrees, the lengths to which Sonic fans will go to argue their points can admittedly get pretty absurd, and in the very worst cases, toxic. One of the most contentious recurring arguments in the fandom is that of classic Sonic versus modern Sonic, namely which one is better and which one should obtain stronger focus for future titles and media representation. While this discourse has existed for many years, essentially since the shift to 3D circa 1998, the devolution of the conversation has reached a fever pitch more recently, only within the last few years. While it was always in the periphery, the loudest of rallying cries for the return of classic Sonic really began in late 2009 with the announcement of Project Needlemouse, a purposely vague PR gimmick to tease the next Sonic title, but one that was quickly determined by fans to be Pikachu in a sombrero. Sonic 4. While this was the kickoff point, the most problematic issues didn't actually start until early 2010 when the first actual gameplay of Sonic 4 was revealed. With that gameplay came the realization that the game would utilize modern Sonic design. And with that, all of a sudden a long-running but up until that point fairly low-key debate in the fanbase was thrust into the limelight. Why was a clear callback to the classic series utilizing modern trappings? To many during this period, this probably seemed to be a bit of a non-issue. It wasn't like modern Sonic hadn't appeared successfully in classic-styled games in the past. Sonic Pocket Adventure on the Neo Geo Pocket Color has been considered by many to be the last truly classic title before the modern era began with Sonic Adventure, despite using the Dreamcast redesigns and being what is considered by many to be the actual bridge between the classic and modern eras. Additionally, the highly rated Advance trilogy also used modern designs to very little backlash, with Advance 1 being among many classic fans to be considered the true Sonic 4, though I certainly wouldn't go as far to claim that personally. Following that, the Rush series, which served as a spiritual successor to the Advance games, were also well-received 2D titles using modern trappings, with no noticeable fan outcry. So what instigated this seemingly overnight heel turn on the part of classic fans with Sonic 4? Ultimately, it boiled down to, well, the name. Petty as it sounds now, the fact that this title was named Sonic 4 really does seem to be the main factor that led to the immense classic Sonic uprising during that period. The ripples of this divide were enormous at the time, leading to fan petitions, packs to buy Sonic 1 instead of Sonic 4 on its release day, and even a thread on Sonic Retro that became such a dumpster fire that the site staff had to lock it and start over from scratch with strict rule enforcement to avoid members ripping the site apart a second time. The dialogue around this decision was so heated, it actually instigated my first ever videos on YouTube. Videos so awkward and embarrassing that I took them down within the same week. Don't go looking, you won't find them. The fact of the matter is, Sonic 4 is too loaded of a name to not instigate strong feelings from fans who had waited 16 years for a proper sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Waiting that long before the next numerical follow-up leaves plenty of time for fan imagination and expectation to run wild, and thus plenty of things to be disappointed about. As an aside, this is probably also exactly the reason that, even though we likely will get an eventual spiritual successor to the adventure formula, it almost certainly won't be called Sonic Adventure 3. Sega definitely learned the hard way not to try this again. While the aesthetic choice alone was probably the biggest aspect that caused these debates to rage, when the game was leaked early and people realized it not only didn't look the way they expected it to, but also played miserably, all bets were off. At this point, there was very little of this burnt out husk of a project that would be worth Sega bothering to save, even though Episode 2 did quite a bit to mitigate the worst Episode 1 had to offer. Not only did calling the title Sonic 4 create huge fan outcry, but unbeknownst to Sega, what at this time seemed to be a one-off miscalculation would cause the classic versus modern debate to continue to balloon out and remain heated all the way until present day. The flame of these arguments were fanned into a full-out firestorm by Sonic 4, and the result has been a forest fire licking at the roots of the fanbase ever since. While it quieted slightly after Sonic Generations in 2011, which attempted to make both sides happy with classic and modern Sonic working together side by side, the result was classic fans not being satisfied with the quality of the physics and the level design of classic, and modern Sonic fans not being satisfied with the amount of 3D gameplay that remained, as in addition to the 50% of the game dedicated to classic Sonic, modern still had huge 2D sections that took up large portions of each level's runtime, limiting the amount of actual 3D gameplay significantly. After a quick and lukewarmly received experiment in the form of Sonic Lost World, Sonic Team inexplicably attempt this split identity approach once more with Sonic Forces to markedly worse results due to critical panning. In addition to Sonic Forces, however, 2017 also gave us the critically celebrated and also financially successful Sonic Mania, which catered more to the classic fanbase specifically. Focusing primarily on this market made for a much more focused, though not absolutely perfect title, whose success clearly resonated with Sega, as it was singled out by name in Sega Sammy's November 2017 report for nearly doubling the sales of the company's packaged game software field compared to the same period of the previous year. Which brings us to now. The relative success of Sonic Mania versus Sonic Force's failure from a critical perspective has certainly left an impact on how Sega and Sonic Team perceive their brand, and where they see potential for future financial success. This was clearly seen at 2018's South by Southwest Sonic panel, where fans noticed a markedly classic Sonic emphasis for the near future, represented by the announcement of the upcoming Sonic Mania Plus and the free overhaul patch, the reveal of the classic Sonic-inspired Puma shoes, which are ugly as sin by the way, as well as the announcement and subsequent release of Sonic Mania Adventures, a multi-part animated series directed by Tyson Hesse of Mania and Sonic comic fame. While this classic-focused approach is in part due to the fact that the sure-to-becoming modern representation just simply isn't far enough along to reveal just yet, like the almost assuredly modern-themed Sonic Racing title, that I'm still convinced is going to be called Super Sonic Racing due to the Sonic R callback in the logo, but that's neither here nor there, and the ever-looming threat of the live-action CG hybrid Sonic movie. The immediate, though assuredly inaccurate message that a large group of boisterous modern Sonic fans took from the panel is that the emphasis on classic Sonic is taking away from the focus on modern Sonic, the mirror opposite problem Sonic faced in 2010. And just like that, the fires that had been burning ever since Sonic 4 but had quieted prior to 2017 were suddenly reignited in full force. Let's be clear, Sonic has an identity crisis. This is something I've been throwing out there ever since my Problems with Sonic Forces essay that I launched last March, but the problem has only expanded further since that time and in a horrendously unproductive way. The lines in the sand that fans have drawn seem to be solidifying more and more each day, and vast chunks of the debates between the two sides have turned completely toxic, and by extension entirely worthless, reflecting poorly on the fanbase and offering less of value from a consumer standpoint for Sega and Sonic Team to glean from. The fact is, this is an unhealthy cycle that seems to crop up regularly ever since Sega's first attempt at reviving the classic formula with Sonic 4, and as long as the two Sonics, or 3 if you count Sonic Boom, I don't really, are getting effectively equal billing at this period of time in the series, the debate is unlikely to get any more civil. There was a time, and a big part of me still wishes that this could happen, that classic and modern Sonic could coexist within their own distinct pillars. Classic Sonic and the classic formula used for smaller budget 2D titles to cater to the classic base and fill the gaps between the higher production but more sparsely released 3D modern titles, giving an outlet for different segments of the fanbase to know exactly which pillar they can go to get the Sonic and the experience that they want. But the breakdown in civility within the fanbase and the rate at which it's picking up means that even if this is a viable approach, it will continue to kick up so much dirt that its benefits would almost assuredly be outweighed by its detriments. There just aren't enough fans in the fanbase capable of articulating their opinions in a constructive manner that that this approach would yield positive results for improving the discourse of the fanbase. And as we saw with Generations and especially with Forces, playing both sides would ultimately lead to either compromise products or, at the worst case scenario, do everything poorly. Which brings me to my proposed solution, the aforementioned thing many of you are very likely to hate. A fire in a fanbase can only burn when there's something fueling the flames. So what I propose is starving this fire of fuel. What does that mean? It means taking away the point of the argument. It means making the very concept on which these arguments are built entirely moot like it was long ago. Ultimately, it just means this. No more classic, no more modern, just Sonic. Prior to 2010, there was simply no pertinence to the debate of classic versus modern. People had their preferences, sure, and they debated them, of course. A lot of those debates got just as heated and incoherently broken down as those of today as well. So what really was the difference? The difference was that the debates had no actual bearing on the current direction of the series. Classic Sonic had given way to modern Sonic. That was it. Modern Sonic was simply Sonic. Any title that was released was simply a Sonic game, not a modern Sonic game. This rendered opinions on the classic versus modern conversation purely as thought exercises between fans, nothing more. It simply wasn't a major point of contention during the time, which had an added benefit of making the most valuable conversations the ones that revolved around the quality or lack of quality of the titles themselves, and the aspects related to them. That relative focus made the points shine out far more clearly then than they do now. Their value was made all the more clear with the sheer wall of critical panning that accompanied the sliding scale of quality present in the main series titles in the early 2000s until the franchise had a complete quality breakdown culminating in Sonic 06. The majority of fan outcry as well as the poor critical reception gave Sega a solid roadmap via consumer feedback about what direction to take moving forward. The clarity of title-oriented focus simply doesn't exist as prominently now because things that are far more subjective are given the limelight, like the classic versus modern debate. But if you remove those horses from the race, the opportunity to realign and refocus the consumer message to Sega on matters of quality as opposed to high degrees of personal preference may bring the potential of better quality to Sonic games in the future. But this is only one of many possible benefits that this consolidation method may bring along with it. But before we go into the other potential benefits that the consolidation method may facilitate, I want to define what this may look like and nip something in the bud that will probably be the sticking point of many angry fans' arguments against it. This consolidation method isn't just about aesthetic differences between classic and modern Sonic. Though those do factor in, there's far more to it. Even the classic Sonic and modern Sonic titles have tons of artistic differences amongst themselves between games, resulting in an inconsistent aesthetic anyway, though the pre-Dreamcast era certainly did have a higher degree of visual consistency. And again, taking it purely aesthetically, the advanced titles are technically modern Sonic despite being classic in gameplay, and Sonic Adventure was originally intended to be classic in aesthetic, but entirely 3D, meaning gameplay has no reason to be tethered to a design. Consolidation could take the form of only classic Sonic or only modern Sonic, but in my personal ideal scenario, a fusion of the two aesthetics could be used, capitalizing on the best elements of both while simultaneously creating a more coherent world. But to get back on track, that's not the point. The actual problem that arises with classic and modern Sonic coexisting is just that. We see them as two separate entities. Heck, at this point they are two separate entities, two autonomous beings in universes that occasionally cross over. The very nature of this arrangement encourages dissension among fans and a fatal lack of brand identity. Classic Mickey Mouse and current Mickey Mouse aren't seen as two different things. They're simply Mickey Mouse, regardless of design. Likewise, Mario has 2D titles, 3D titles, and tons of spin-offs that are all their own thing. But we don't look at the Marios in these titles as different Marios. They're all just Mario. The Mario that appeared in Donkey Kong in 1981 is the same Mario that appeared in Super Mario Odyssey in 2017. Aesthetic elements obviously differ between games, but you can't believably claim that Mario in Super Mario 64 is a radically different character than the Mario in Super Paper Mario in anything other than how they're represented visually. Granted, an argument could believably be made that Mario's character as well as his world are far less rigidly defined than Sonic's, therefore making the former more flexible when it comes to the kinds of scenarios he can find himself in as opposed to those of the latter. The fact that the elements of Sonic's character and personality are so much more prominent than Mario's means that any slightly disparate portrayal will be much more pronounced in its differences. You could say that Sonic's portrayal in the OVA feels entirely different than that of, say, Sonic Colors and not be off base, which entirely illustrates the problem with treating the character like these multiple different subsets. The more options, the more possibilities for contention. The more contention, the less unified and coherent the fans become. The less unified and coherent the fans become, and well, you get one of the most notoriously intolerable and prone to infighting fan bases that are out there, which argue if you want, but it's pretty clear that that's exactly where the Sonic fan base stands as of right now. Let's circle back to one of the first problems that I addressed in my earliest essay, the Sonic franchise's complete lack of brand identity. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Sonic has been represented in so many clearly different ways over the course of his existence that the conversation isn't whether or not you're a Sonic fan, but of what era of Sonic you're a fan of, represented by the clearly delineated camps that currently exist within the larger umbrella of the fanbase. The staggering amount of camps that exist muddies the waters so much in terms of what the fans expect from a Sonic title, that it's no wonder that the current Sonic team has such a problem with making their games so unfocused and therefore inconsistent. In attempting to appeal to everyone simultaneously, they can't fully satisfy anyone, as I explained earlier with the approach taken in Sonic Generations and Sonic Forces. This focus on these different Sonics and the aspects associated with them in the common fan discourse have resulted in things that should be the main focus, good products, getting pushed aside by fans for lower priority supplemental elements. And since opinions on things like character designs, aesthetics, and other non-gameplay aspects are all inherently subjective, it makes the resulting eruptions of poorly articulated opinions and subsequent dogpiles of insults and complete breakdown of human communication a complete farce, and by extension makes them entirely worthless white noise. Not only do these types of conversations lead nowhere, but it also means that there's no beneficial feedback coming from the fanbase to represent an expectation of quality to Sega and Sonic Team. Means that the provider is essentially flying blind as to what direction they ought to go next to satisfy their consumer base. Meaning instead of being able to satisfy everyone, they continue to cater to the smaller segments of the fanbase, thereby starting this self-destructive cycle spinning all over again. And look, as I stated previously, there is a case that could be made for this more segmented approach. The most recent example of this working well is Sonic Mania, a game that primarily catered to the classic fan community to stellar results. If this approach works, what reason would there be to change the consolidation method? To answer that question, we need to address another. Did Mania succeed because it was aimed specifically at fans of the classic titles? I would argue not inherently. If Mania really only catered to classic fans, then why on earth did it do so well financially when classic fans only make up a portion of the fan base? Probably because it's a good game. It's a great game. Because by being a great game, its appeal reached further than just to classic fans. Mania was made with passion by developers who knew what it was like to be a part of the Sonic fanbase, a factor with an importance that can't be understated. Because of their fanbase background, the Mania team not only knew what should be a priority, making a well-playing game, but arguably just as importantly, they knew who to ignore. They knew how to filter out the white noise of the fanbase and how to glean the aspects that actually mattered from it to create something excellent. And despite not listening to the static, they still managed to win over the majority of those responsible for it by virtue of simply making the game excellent and prioritizing that over the small details that get argued about online, further proving that these kinds of devolving rants don't carry any actual value. There may be fans that take umbrage with that last statement, that the classic versus modern debates don't carry any real weight. To which I ask, if you were among those that disagree, did you still purchase Sonic Mania? The sales numbers indicate that you probably did, and that kinda proves the point, doesn't it? Lack of modern Sonic clearly didn't end up costing Mania anything in sales by any means. And that makes it evident that Sonic fans will buy Sonic games regardless of design, leaving us having to acknowledge that when you boil it all down, the only thing that these shouting matches accomplish is make the fanbase look bad, and leaving Sonic Team unclear as to how to actually satisfy the fanbase from a quality perspective. Mania points towards simply making a good game being more than enough. So if the consolidation method opens up the possibility of fan discourse emphasizing the quality of the games and making it clearer to Sega that the quality leads to satisfied fans and good sales, I would personally consider the sacrifice worth it. Despite the benefits, I'll be the first to admit that there would be drawbacks to the consolidation method. It may indeed take away the biggest point of contention currently in the fanbase, but by doing so, wouldn't that also mean that they would be alienating large swaths of that fanbase? The answer, of course, is yes, but the question that it subsequently brings up is, does that actually even matter? If we look at Mania once more, it proves that just because a game favors one segment of the fanbase over another, it won't result in less success. The Sonic franchise's blessing, and in a lot more ways its curse, is that Sonic fans will buy Sonic regardless of approach or even the quality of the game. The major differences being that focusing on making a good game will appeal not just to Sonic fans, but the general gaming market as well, thus resulting in a far greater success than it would have received otherwise. In addition, this would mean that new members of the fanbase that would come in after the consolidation would also come up in a period of time where Sonic is simply Sonic, full stop. Meaning future generations of the fanbase won't have to put up with today's fan discourse as a part of their contemporary conversation outside of discussing it purely on a historical basis, just like it used to be pre-2010. Further, the amount of fan static would also be forced to decrease when the discussions are naturally shifted from do you like classic or modern Sonic games better to which game do you like better. It sounds like a small difference, but the impact would run far deeper, because this would mean discussing the actual merits of the titles themselves again, instead of just focusing on the supplemental elements. While of course subjective discussions and arguments would still exist, they would at least start to be localized on individual titles again, which would end up being of more value when it comes to receiving feedback for Sonic Team. Look, I'm under no illusion that the consolidation method is going to be a magic cure for all the fanbase's woes. Obviously, nothing will ever completely destroy those kinds of unhelpful white noise conversations from existing. Not by a long shot. But what it will do is make them easier to curate, easier to quantify based on the merit of the argument, and ultimately make the bad arguments easier to ignore in favor of focusing on the conversations that actually end up holding value, not the ones that make the fanbase look bad. This would naturally result in better data for Sonic Team to glean from consumers that would allow them to take meaningful feedback from previous titles and apply it to future titles, which would lead to better games in the future as a whole. Based on the amount of infighting that has become synonymous with the Sonic fanbase, it just doesn't seem like we as a fanbase are in a mature enough position to handle each other's opinion in a manner that makes the multi-Sonic approach a healthy thing. And until it gets to that point, if it ever even can, maybe the option should just stay off the table. For now, but maybe not forever. So, now that I have thoroughly alienated everyone on both sides of the debate, that's all I've got. Have a good one.